without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker on this topic. It's Sheila Jeffreys. Sheila Jeffreys writes in the area of sexual politics, international gender politics, and lesbian and gay politics. She's written 18 books on history of politics and sexuality. Originally from the UK, Sheila moved to Melbourne in 1991 to take up a position in the University of Melbourne. She retired back to the UK in 2015 and has been actively involved in feminist and lesbian feminist politics, particularly around the issue of sexual violence, since 1973. She's a director of Women's Declaration International and co-author of the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. She is the author of Beauty and Misogyny, which is one of the very relevant books for the topic that we're discussing today. So thank you so much, Sheila. And your talk is called Gender as Dominance and Submission. So over to you.
Hello, everybody. Hello, sisters. So I'm going to argue today that as femininity is the behavior of subordination, masculinity is the behavior of male domination. Now, women as the subordinate sex class are trained into femininity, and then, of course, they are told that it is natural, and many people believe that it's natural. However, an increasing number of men, encouraged by pornography, now find this behavior of subordination sexually exciting because they are masochists. And to justify their sexual perversion, they proclaim that they have something called a gender identity that entitles them to pretend to be women in law and society. And the fact that men actually do imitate this behavior and train themselves into it is quite a good indication that actually the behavior is a construction. Now, if we're going to combat the male behavior of gender identity politics, which threatens women's very existence in law and threatens our recognition as a category of persons, then femininity has to be challenged in its entirety. After all, men cannot imitate femininity if this behavior of the subordinate class doesn't exist. The vicious and insulting adoption of woman-hating stereotypes by men for their entertainment in the form of gender identity or drag is increasingly rejected and excoriated by feminists, which is great, and many other people too. But the adoption of these stereotypes by many feminists themselves is generally not questioned. Indeed, the questioning can be seen as rude and unsisterly. If you make a political critique of femininity, for instance, often you're seen as unsisterly towards other women. Now, the feminism of the women's liberation movement in the 1970s, in which I was involved, started with the rejection of what were called sex role stereotypes, with protests against the Miss World contest, for instance. Many thousands of women in the UK, and I was one of them, gleefully threw off the constrictions of sex role stereotypes in our appearance. We stopped depilating, stopped wearing makeup. We wore only comfortable shoes. We stopped, in many cases, wearing short skirts and showing naked parts of our bodies. We cut our long hair. We became bold and bare-faced. We did it in huge numbers and with the support of our sisters. And it helped that the fashion of the time was unisex. Extremely gendered appearance was less dominated at that time than it is now. But that movement to throw off femininity is nowhere to be seen now. Women who are drawn into feminism by the crisis of men's aggressive gender identity activism and the threat to women have no knowledge of the critique of femininity and do not, in many cases, see the rejection of gender identity as having anything to do with them personally. Many feminists see femininity as something harmless. They may see the problem as being only when it's extreme or when it's adopted by men, not by women. In fact, as I will explain, femininity is not just an inconvenient imposition upon women, but the behavior of subordination that girls and women are trained into by cultural imposition, by force, and through sanctions. It's not harmless, and it affects women's ability to respect themselves and other women and stand up for their rights and dignity as human beings. It shapes everything that women are able to do and be in their lives. Femininity and masculinity represent the behaviors of two classes of people under male domination. It's about politics and hierarchy, not choice and fun. Neither femininity nor masculinity would survive if women were free. The hierarchy of gender or sex role stereotyping is, under male domination, eroticized to form what is understood as sex, and to a large extent, what is understood as culture. The simplest way to understand that gender is about power is to consider the body language expectations of girls and boys, women and men. How we use our bodies is supposed to conform to our position in a hierarchy. Boys and men, for instance, take up more space and have more freedom of movement, as befits dominance. Girls and women occupy very little space and are restricted in movement, as befits subordinates. This pattern is repeated in the relations of other groups of people in a power hierarchy, such as servants and their masters or mistresses, workers and their bosses, slaves and their owners. The areas occupied by servants and workers are restricted, whereas the masters and bosses have spacious offices and areas of the house to be in. Feminist social geographers have shown that these rules of hierarchy extend to women's and men's spaces in the home. Men may have their special armchairs. They may have offices or sheds that only they may enter. Women do not generally have their own spaces, where children have to knock on the door, for instance. Presently, we are not allowed to have our own spaces outside the home either. Men riot at the very idea of it. Now, the rules about space extend to how men and women are expected to walk and sit and hold themselves. Boys and men are expected to take up space, as feminists, for instance, have noticed in relation to the practice of man spreading, in which men take up space on public transport. In the home as well as out of it, men may sprawl, spreading legs and arms along chair backs, so that the envelope they inhabit is large. Women, on the other hand, are expected to keep knees together and arms by their sides. In fact, sprawling, especially with the leg thrown over the back of the sofa, is out. It would be impossible anyway in the subordinate clothing assigned to women. If women spread and throw their legs about in the feminine clothing of skirts, their underwear is revealed. Little girls are trained to conceal their knickers and be feminine by instructions to keep their knees together and keep pulling their skirts down. In skirts, they cannot easily bend over to pick up something in the classroom without boys sexualizing and harassing them. Femininity restricts women's and girls' movement and their use of space. The appearance norms imposed upon women represent not just women's subordinate position, but women's purpose, i.e., sexually arousing their masters. Femininity is eroticized to be the basic mechanism of sex under male domination. I understand the appearance norms of femininity as the rules of the harem, in which the women, whose job is to sexually service men, must make themselves sexually attractive at all times, in case the lord and master comes to find himself someone to sexually use for the night. Men, of course, do not have to do this. Now, subordination in appearance involves nakedness, and nakedness in women excites their masters. So women should show naked and shaved and preferably shiny legs, arms, armpits, cleavage, shoulders and backs, sometimes butt cracks or toe cleavage, and being clothed, especially when others are naked, such as in a strip club, for instance, signifies power. This is shown in clothing such as t-shirts and shorts, Men's upper garments are likely to have sleeves, whereas women's show naked arms, chests, and shoulders. Men's shorts will always be longer, even to the knee, whereas women's shorts will very generally show bits of their buttocks. Men's clothes can be loose, whereas women's must be tight, showing the outlines of women's bodies so men can get sexually excited. Femininity involves the sexual display of women's bodies. Masculinity does not have this imposition upon men. Femininity requires that women engage in degrading rituals of depilation, makeup, perfuming, to ensure their sexual desirability to the dominant male sex class. Women are expected to wear impossibly high-heeled winkle-picker shoes that make walking extremely difficult, because such disability is attractive to men. Women are supposed to wobble and not have 2 feet on the ground. Women are hobbled and restricted. This is the cultural ideal of femininity, and revealed in the fact that female newsreaders on all TV channels wear these fetish shoes, so that it's impossible to watch the news without engaging in the degradation of a woman, watching a kind of pornography. So the only alternative really is to close your eyes and simply listen to the news if you don't want to have to join in with this performance. Now, women with significant roles in public life are expected to wear the crippling footwear. Heaven forbid that women should expect to have important and influential roles without demonstrating their deference to the males into whose realm they have strayed. This goes for most women politicians, for instance, for women musicians in orchestra, for women footballers as soon as they leave the field. They must be deferential and show that they know their place, crippled, showing naked parts of the body, depilated, and made up. Now, all of the behavior that I've been describing constitutes what's seen as natural femininity. It is not natural, but demonstrates deference and sexualized subordinate status. It is imposed, and girls are trained to it. Girls and women who do not do it are punished. Lesbians are hated by men because we mostly refuse all the behaviors of subordination and have the cheek to usurp the freedoms of men instead of being sexy for them. It is this behavior of subordination that forms the basis of men's sexual practice of transvestism or gender identity. The men who pretend to be women, the men who claim to have a female gender identity, adopt the appearance norms and behaviors of femininity because they're sexually excited by masochism. They know, in a way that most women seem not to, that femininity is the behavior of subordination. All of this is really clear in their writings and in their pornography. If the behaviors of subordination that constitute femininity were abandoned by women, gender identity politics and practice could no longer exist. It would not, for instance, be exciting for men to pretend to be women wearing T-shirts and jeans and short hair, because that's not about masochism, it's not about subordination. They wouldn't want to do that. So, in fact, these men actually sort of perform for women and train women in the behavior of femininity. It's an important question, then, why there's so little criticism of femininity in general in what are called gender-critical feminist politics. If we want to eliminate the idea of gender identity for men, then we have to do the same for women. Even if men were not doing their insulting impersonations of women, we would need to get rid of femininity because it ensures and represents women's subordination. If we want girls to grow up with an idea of freedom, we should not be modeling sexual slavery through clothing and crippling shoes. Femininity creates what Mary Daly calls mind bindings, as well as bindings for the body. Thank you.